Okay, cool. I think we'll get cracking. Um, just so anyone knows, if everyone's got any questions or any issues with sound or anything, just message in the chat function, please. Otherwise, I think we can get cracking. So thanks for joining tonight. I'm sure you are taking up a few hours of your evening to spend with us to hopefully give you some insightful information about how to set up a squat for the first time. And we've got some great experts today on the panel to hopefully give us different insights from different parts of the whole process. We've got Murray from Anglian, who is a true, I would say, pioneer in this industry. Since I think Anglian Dental is one of the oldest companies in the UK. His father set up the company many years ago on actually, refitting out and refurbishing practices and set up squats. So, got some really good experience from him and from Phil, just about how to look from the the refurb side of the business in terms of actually, physically building the actual practice, plus also the equipment, chairs, and other parts of the surgery that you need to get set up. So he's going to be looking at that as the expert from that side of the business. And then Samantha is joining from Snowbird Finance, who is also very well known in the industry for financing refurbishments or equipment or anything to do with finance and dentistry, but generally to mainly for when you want to buy new equipment and set up a new practice, they can help finance that and explain to you how that process works. And then we've also got someone from Smart Dental Compliance called Saba, who I never met before, but nice to meet you, Saba. She'll be giving her views on the CQC and compliance side of the journey when you set up your first practice, because every small practice has to have that compliance and CQC registration and inspection before you open. So those are our three experts in the panel, and then myself. So I'm Dev Patel. I'm the CEO of Dental Beauty Partners and also Dental Circle. Dental Circle is the largest network of dentists in the UK. We've got over 13,000 dentists in the UK on our network. It's an online platform. If you're not on it yet or never heard of it before, just go on dentalcircle.com. It's free of charge to register. And on there, you'll find lots of events, webinars, courses, conferences, plus also opportunities to get recruitment for new jobs and looking for associates, where you can put up your portfolio of your work and your CV. And then my other hat on the other side of it is also Dental Beauty Partners, which is a rapidly growing dental group around the UK, mainly around London, but also Manchester as well now. We partner with Kiss Dental as well, which I'm sure is a well-known brand around the UK. We essentially buy practices with partners, with dentists who actually want to buy equity in the business. So together we partner with dentists half and half, and then we do the management and the back end kind of headache of running the practice and growing it and even buying it at the beginning and financing it. And then the partners come in clinically to run the practice as a principal and work together as partners. And we've got around 35 sites across the UK at the moment and looking to keep growing. So I'm going to hopefully give a bit of input about clinically and also operationally how some of the pitfalls and things to think about when you are buying your first practice and set up a squat. So without further ado, Priya, who's also our head of marketing, is also head of my growth team, should I say, is also on the call. Who's going to be moderating the call today and just asking the questions and hopefully guiding us in the right direction for our discussion. So I think let's get cracking, guys. Next question.
Okay. So the first question is, how much does a squat practice setup cost? So Murray, do you want to start off?
Yeah, thanks, Priya. You hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, very good evening to everyone. Been looking forward to this for a while, so great to get started. It's a question we get asked a lot, probably the first question everyone asks us, and it's something we thought we could try and help answer in this call tonight. And the answer is it does vary a lot, but we can try and talk through things which make it vary and some of the variances you can look at. And see, Dev can chip in as well with his experiences. In general terms, and this is a hard question to generalize, but it mostly varies depending on the type of building you're looking at. Is in our experience, this is coming at it from an equipment and practice setup point of view. At one end, you will come across buildings which are ready-made rooms, and you're just installing a dental chair in those rooms, and you can, it reduces the fit-out costs a lot because you're not doing anything structural. All you're doing is running the services. And doing one recently where we're looking at about £250 a square metre, for really, because it's just an installation within existing rooms. They are rare, and most of the time we're looking at an actual fit out where you're putting up walls, you're doing structural works, you're putting in drainage, aircon, ventilation, much more to it. And most buildings where squats are set up in residential properties or in retail spaces, you're just getting a shell and there's a full fit out needed. And in terms of costs, you can look anywhere between about £1,000 to £2,500 per square metre. But it does vary hugely on the property you're going for. So one thing we recommend is getting in touch with an expert and writing out a bit of a high level before you get to embroiled in the detail, like a banking budget. And if I can share my screen, I will just show you an example of a banking budget. I'm going to be the host. And this is just a very high level tool, which will allow you to get rough costs on fit out. So you can go to banks, you can go to investors and put together a business case as to roughly what it's going to cost before you are committed. And I'll just, if we made the host. So this is an example of a banking budget. So we break it down into three main areas where you have your design works, your build works, and your fit out. And without going into the detail, this is an exercise which we take our clients through, and at a high level you can have based on a site. So generally we'd need to go and see the site or have in-depth conversation, and then we can issue this report, which isn't a quotation, but it gives you a rough estimate as to what you're looking at in terms of equipment, in terms of your build works, in terms of your professional fees. And this is something you can use to raise finance on. Hope that helps. Dev's obviously got some pearls of value as well.
Yeah, look, I think it can really vary, as Murray mentioned. Not only is it, if you're trying to make a practice in something that already has a very weird structure or I would say nuances to the building, because it's much easier to have an empty shell like a commercial building on a high street. That's the easiest, kind of blank canvas to make sure, your vision of your dream practice can come true. If you're doing it in an existing residential property or a house where they've got, funny kind of walls and slanted windows, stuff like that, it's more difficult. But I think the general thing here is really to work backwards from actually, before you think about what the costs of the squat would be, is what do you need to become profitable? So what that means is actually thinking about your fixed costs, like the rent, the rates, lighting costs, staff costs, etc., and then going back from that and saying, what can we actually afford? Because a lot of the times you get financing. I'm sure Samantha can give us some insight on this afterwards, on actually the business plan of the practice, and actually what's the profits going to be in year one, in month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, as well as year 2 and 3 and 4. And it's very difficult to essentially put your finger up in the air and work out, how many people are going to come in the front door? How much revenue are we going to have from day one? How are we going to get the revenue in the first place? How are we going to get people coming in the front door in the first place? So there's a lot of assumptions you need to make when you model it out of what you're looking at when you want to have a new practice. And then after you've worked that out, then you can say, all right, well, we're going to become profitable after 6 months or a year, and therefore my repayments will make sure that it's viable. There's no point spending a fortune, like £3,000 per square metre, and doing a really high-end fit out if you can't kind of be confident on the assumptions that you can get the revenue coming in quick enough to make the repayments. I'm sure Samantha will be asking questions as well, when it comes to looking at, the actual viability of the loan repayment. So I think work backwards from a business model. And I think anyone looking to any squat would have to do it in the beginning anyway, not only for financing, but just for themselves to actually make sure there's a viable option. And that can vary a lot. If you're having a practice in central London, you could be spending 150,000 on fixed cost from day one because rent and rate's so high, versus setting up one out into suburbs where it's almost a quarter of the cost or even a tenth of the cost. So it's really important to make sure your fixed costs are low as possible, and you can do what's essential for the business, like not adding in 5 chairs from day one, maybe getting them ready, plumbing and wiring for it, but only adding 1 or 2 chairs from day one, and then building them out as the business plan kind of makes more sense over the 2 or 3 year period, just so that you're not over leveraged and that you're not overdoing it for yourself, having too much stress. So yeah, I mean, it can really vary. People want high-end practices, some want just basic ones, but the key thing is just make sure that you look at your business plan and that you correlate whatever your assumptions of profitability and revenue each month to your repayments. And if that makes sense, then you can work within that budget afterwards. Next one, please, Priya.
Yeah. So that kind of leads on to the next question, which is, what are the key factors to consider when choosing a site? Deb, do you want to go first?
Yes. So I think when it comes to choosing a site, we do a similar process whereby we have to reassess the competition. With a squat, you haven't got a contract from the NHS government, in terms of, UDA contract. You haven't got a guaranteed footfall of patients who are going to come into your door from day one, unless you're bringing them over from either another practice that you've got goodwill at, which is quite rare, because normally that's the other practices since they can't steal them, or from like an Instagram or social media account where you've got leads coming in directly to you. So it's really important to think about location. Same as when you buy a house. It's really important to think about that. But then also, when you do find the right location and the right site, look at the competition in the area. See what other people are doing in the area. Are they doing similar services, costs, treatments to what you're doing? And if they are, what is going to make you different to them? And if it's no difference between you guys, there should be a huge amount of footfall of patients to make sure that you can all split the patients between yourselves. Because the last thing we do is open up a practice that look amazing and feel amazing, but getting patients in from the front door, from footfall walking past, is much easier than spending a fortune or a lot of time and effort on marketing through social media or pumping in money for ads and stuff like that. So really important to find the right location. The second thing is space. Don't buy a practice that's only got 2 chairs space maximum, or 3 chairs. Make sure you've got a minimum of 4 to 5 chairs. I would say minimum of 5 these days, because when you set up a squat, it's amazing when it does well, but you don't want to be in a position where it does well, and after you hit 2 chairs, you're like, okay, I can't do anything else now. I've got to buy another one down the road for 2 more chairs or 3 more chairs. So you want to think ahead and have the availability to do more, but not spend a fortune from day one if they have to. So that means buy take on the lease for 5 years with a break clause. So you've got options to be there for a long time, but have an option to get out if you need to with a 5-year break clause or 3-year break clause, and also have the option to grow. So you've got 5 chairs physically drawn out and planned on the drawings when you go with Murray or Anglian, and after that just only build 1 or 2 for now with the chairs and equipment in there, and when you get busier, build the next one and the next one, the next one each time. So therefore you don't go too big too quickly, and you're being safer in terms of repayments, the costs, and just to see how the market is, because once again, with a squat, you've got no idea what's going to happen. And unfortunately, there's other factors in the world like COVID, recession, and other things that might actually impact your business plan that haven't even been thought about. And therefore, you don't want to, overspend from day one, have the fixed costs going out, but not have the actual, revenue coming in from day one. So always think about, business plans are there and they usually, work quite well, but always be conservative and think, worst case scenario to be safe. And finally, I think, having a big enough space is important, location is important, but also just think about recruitment. So, everyone wants to buy a practice in an area that they like. I could be living in a suburb, in a village in somewhere in Kent and think, oh, I love this area, let's have a practice here and squat. But actually, if you can't recruit dentists and nurses there, it won't work. Unless you want to be a one-man practice or one lady practice forever. So it's really important to think about where you're locating your practice and can you recruit in that area or not. And if it's not close to a commutable town like London or Manchester or Birmingham or a big city or Nottingham or whatever, then you're probably too far out to make it work easily. And you can make it work anywhere in the country, but then be more dependent on you personally, because there's less recruitment. There's a bigger issue of recruitment in the country right now. And if you can't recruit, then the whole business plan fails. And you want to be in a position where the practice itself can make money for you without you working every single day clinically just to make it work. You're meant to take a holiday and not having to worry about the whole practice shutting down because it's a one-man practice. So really think these things through when you're looking at, what kind of area to buy the practice and the factors. Murray, anything from your side?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on this one, Dev.
Oh, go on, Phil.
Hello. Key factors. So it's good what you just said. It's some techie sides of a building as to you need to ensure DDA compliance. You need to ensure that you can get a surgery, a reception desk, and a bathroom facilities, all on the ground floor. If you're setting up squat practice, you come into the building regulations, you need CQC compliance, And if you haven't got that, you won't get it. So you've got to come off the street in a wheelchair and have those things. So we get about 1 in 20 sites for clients that we have to say, sorry, it's not going to work. So just to be aware of that. And the other thing alongside that is the structural bits of a building. Often the building it's either old or very, very new. Often you've got a lot of structural columns and other things that are not going to go away. They're just going to be part of the practice, and they can have a very heavy impingement on your design and what you can eventually achieve in the practice. So there's just a couple of bits there. Taking off a bit more on your location, which is cool what you just said. My advice to anyone looking at location, but is to find what is truly unique. Find something you can do truly unique for your practice. Dentistry is very competitive. It's very busy at the moment, but that may change. But you've got to be something that your practice is unique about. So if you imagine sort of flying over the area and a 10,000 foot in a helicopter and sort of being, what is that practice doing? That's a bit extreme, but you can understand the idea. So my advice would be Google the whole world, and I mean the whole world around the globe, and what is happening in dentistry? Who are the pioneers? What's the next new thing? What can you bring to the UK that's special, is unique, and you get your practice built on that. If you just become another dentist, you won't succeed. But if you can be unique and something special, you'll get traction. You'll get good results. Competition is important. What Dev's covered, I'm not going to add to that, but just sort of do your research, walk the pavement, talk to local practices off the record, if you like, as to how busy they are, what are their unique things, have they got a CBCT, what are the specialists, all part of the whole picture. That's me done.
Thanks, Phil. Mary, anything from your side?
No, it's well covered.
Cheers. Cool. All right, on to the next one then, Priya.
Okay, so the next question is, how long does a project take? Murray, do you want to go first?
Depends on who you use, but yeah, I'll let Murray talk about it.
Yeah, it's again a commonly asked question, and I think my pearl of advice on this is to plan it properly, because a project which is well planned will be much less stressful and will go quicker than if you just start. We see a tendency among a lot of our customers, they just want to start and get on site as quick as possible, and that is important, but sometimes it's best just to spend time planning out what's going to happen, where everything's going to go, and get a proper set of drawings done, proper spec and quote written out and agreed, because problems arise and delays arise when there's changes or when there's ambiguity. So as a business, we quite process driven, and we're very focused on, before we start on site, there's a proper signed off drawings, and we do visuals, we do technical drawings, and write out proper scopes. It's very clear exactly what you're going to be getting and how it's going to look, and we go right down to 3D visuals so you can visualize the premise. And if you're planning it properly, then it will go smoother. So most squats we do fall somewhere between about 8 weeks and about 14 weeks. And the reason it's so consistent is because it's planned. And another thing that's important is to get a schedule. Whoever's doing your project, get an agreed schedule set out. So before you start on site, you know exactly the dates coming along and when it'll be finished. You know when to arrange your sequences better. There'll be more on that later. And set up a regular meeting rhythm. So all our projects, we have a weekly site meeting, so that any questions, anything that comes up, any decisions that need to be made, there's a regular rhythm of meetings, and that's agreed before you start on site. And I think those key things will really help a project keep rolling. And I think is to work back as well from when you want to open up, and then work out the critical hoops, critical decisions you've got to be made. So some things are on long lead times. Sit down at the start of the project, right, what do I need to decide and by when? So you write out a decision program so you know at what points you need to have made those critical decisions.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, very, very, very important stuff, guys. I mean, from my side, I think the two things I would say is choose the right person to do the project in the first place. We used probably, I think, 5 out of the top, companies in the UK who do dental refurb projects, and I can say hand on heart without having to get paid or anything. I have no affiliation with Angle in any way, but they're probably the best out there in terms of actually managing the whole project, which includes the building work, actual refit of the surgeries, and the chairs and equipment and the cabinetry, plus the actual project management, which is really, really essential. You take it for granted, but actually when you're working clinically as a dentist and you're buying a squat and you're trying to do that at the same time, those phone calls of trying to sort the builders out on time and coming in about times and who does what and what time, that is invaluable to get that right. And those delays can cost you a fortune, because otherwise you miss the CQC deadlines for CQC inspections, for example, by too long. The whole thing has to start from the beginning again. I could do the whole project by 3 months. If you don't get the right timings for your project in terms of going for launch, you've got patients coming in, that costs you issues with brand. If there's so many different variables that go wrong here, that project planning is so important. And as Murray mentioned, they'll do a great job in project managing the actual building refurb and actual building works, but you should also have a project manager, which we do for all of our practices, which is every single step from, when the signage can be ordered, who's going to do signage, who's going to be coming in to do the applications for the CQC, at what point does that get sent forward, how long does that process take, at what point do you start thinking about hiring staff? There's all different things you need to think about, and all those different elements will then lead to a timeline. And if you start from the beginning to the completion of the launch and you work through the whole timeline and hopefully you hit the targets with a bit of buffer there, it will go smoothly. But if you don't plan, like dentistry, you always fail. So really important to choose the right partner, plan ahead properly with the right spreadsheet of different action points. And if anyone needs any help on that, happy just to message me afterwards. I can send you a template to that. And I think lastly, it's just about being on top of things. I think if you're doing a squat, you're going to learn a lot on the first time, but you do need to keep on top of all those different tasks, not let one or two of them delay, because otherwise the whole process will delay and it won't ever kind of work to the right timelines. Because we've seen people do a squat over a year, sometimes maybe even 2 years, to get the whole thing up and running. And we've done it in 3 months now for every project that we do. So, you can get efficient at doing these things and get better and better at doing it, like you're doing a filling for the first time versus the 10th time. But you have to make sure that you keep on top of things and don't kind of just take a step back and relax too much, because it's quite an intense process. And I would definitely recommend to have advisors like Anglian on board to make sure you can help create that timeline and that process together with you from day one, so you know what to expect and how to go along the journey.
There's 3 things on the project like this, isn't there? Time, quality, and cost. You only ever have 2 of the 3.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, I've learned from the hard mistakes of going for people a bit cheaper and having a lot more time afterwards, a lot more headache as well. So it's always worth spending the right amount of money sometimes for these things. Cool. For your next one.
Okay, so the next question is, what are the common pitfalls when setting up a squat practice? Murray, do you want to go first?
I think Dev's probably the best person to answer this.
Okay, Dev.
I'm not saying there's lots of pitfalls.
I was going to say it's everything, isn't it? Nothing goes right. No, look, I think from my point of view, when we're the first projects, for example, I think the biggest pitfalls typically are not to do with the actual building works, unless you're buying or taking over an old building. So be very wary that when you buy an old building, there's a lot of unknowns. And I compare this to like when you take off a crown off a patient for 20 years and underneath there, you've got no idea what's underneath that metal crown, right? You take it off the metal crown and you think, oh, it should be all fine, there's a nice prep there. But actually there's loads of decay there, it's cracked or whatever. So it's the same thing when you're doing building works. You've got no idea what happens when you take the floors out or when you to take a wall down or something like that. There's lots of unknowns there that you can do a bit of work on and a bit of, kind of preempting of it, but it can happen and that can be a big issue. So always try to think about, avoid old buildings with structural issues or structural work. Then that will avoid issues going forward for the building work plan. Other pitfalls when set up as practice is timing. So as I mentioned before, you have this kind of, I would say 2 things to worry about when you set up practice. Number 1 is how busy do you get practice as soon as possible, as in bums on seats for marketing. And number 2 is how quickly the revenue come through the practice, start paying off the bills. Remember, you have 0 revenue from day 1, but costs are outgoing straight away from from your monthly account. So you might have 10, 20, 30k coming out of your account every month. You can't get the revenue coming in to make up for that and pay the staff wages and your material costs, lab bills, etc. You're already going to be negative loss. Now, no squats are profitable from day one. Some do really well and get profitable after 3 months, 6 months. Some take a year or 2 years. But you don't want to be in a position where you're having to put money out of your pocket, out of your savings, just to make it work because your assumptions aren't correct. So once again, going back a step, if you plan really well from the beginning and make really, really conservative worst case assumptions for your business plan, and then your worst case assumptions for expenditure for how much you're spending on refurb, your loan costs going out each month, make it low as possible, as lean as possible, you have a much better chance of having less issues financially in terms of payments for loans. Once again, we're going for a recession in the next few months, or start for the next probably few years. It's not going to be easy to get new patients to spend money. We've had a great boom since COVID and probably last 5 to 6 years. Patients are loving dentistry, private work, cosmetic work, orthodontics, implants. That's all big trend. But that will come to an end when patients generally can't afford to pay back repayments for those treatments over finance, or they haven't got any disposable cash anymore because they're paying for basic living costs. So please think, don't make your practice all about just high-end treatments, and think about marketing plans and bringing patients in for general restorative work, not just cosmetic work. And in the locations, once again, where you've got good footfall, where you can get people on the front door, not just because they've got an Instagram account in the middle of nowhere, okay? Really important to think about that. And then I think lastly, it's just, think about staff and staff costs. Your most expensive cost will be your staff costs, dentists and your dentist staff. It's best that you work clinically initially to make sure you don't have to pay yourself as a wage. So if you're working for free of charge or not, there's no kind of cost going out for yourself as a dentist. That's one easy win. But staff, you need to have them as well. But don't overhire. Don't start having 3 or 4 nurses, 1, 2 receptionists, 1 PM for like a 2-chair practice. Start really, really lean. Have 1 person in reception, 1 person in surgery, and then 1 dentist and 1 hygienist or whatever, and build up the books accordingly to make sure your financials can make sense, to make sure you're profitable as soon as possible. The key thing is you keep trying to beat your outgoings in terms of revenue coming in to make sure you're profitable sooner rather than later. Then it makes your life a lot easier for everything afterwards. And I think the other thing I mentioned as well is try not to go for, when you're set up your first practice for the first time, don't buy cheap stuff. We bought my first practice in Kent, and the old owner actually decided to buy chairs from China. I was like, oh yeah, he's got 4 new chairs in the practice. They look really nice, and they look comfortable. They're leather and quite wide. I thought, oh, great. I couldn't find anyone to service them, number one. When I did service them, found some guy in North London who can come down once a month to service them and to fix them, which broke every single week. I ended up spending more money on fixing the chair than I could have bought a new one within a year period. So go for quality work, quality equipment that is bread and butter workhorse like Belmont or ADEC that is going to last, not going to have any issues for yourself, and not going to be last of your issues you have to worry about. And try to go for buildings that are pretty much an empty shell, like a commercial building where you don't have huge issues and relatively new, so you don't have to worry about asbestos or other things that underneath the cracks or ceilings and the walls or the flooring. But yeah, look, there's going to be a million and one problems. I've heard about people's squats being set up, and during the building works, pipes leak, the whole place is flooded. I've heard about one of them being burnt down because of some sort of computer fault with electrics, because they've got a cheap electrician to come in. Anything go wrong in the practice, like any building. So it's really important that you do things properly, and you spend money on the right people and the experts who can do it properly for you, because that would be a lot cheaper along the long run than it would be to do it incorrectly and having problems constantly over the first 5 to 10 years when you already have costs going out. But yeah, those are kind of my only piece of advice I can give you guys.
Okay, that kind of leads on to the next question actually, which is, how do you choose the right dental equipment for your needs? Murray, do you want to start first?
Oh, Phil's going.
Oh,
I'm on this one. Choosing the right equipment is it's a bit of a 2-sided answer, because whether you're using it yourself or you want to, you've got associates working on the equipment. If we cover yourself first, important thing is the ergonomics. Your whole, imagine how many hours you're going to spend in this room or in the practice working. We used to get really excited about sort of designing stuff at home, kitchen for the wife and that sort of thing. But in actual fact, the kitchen isn't used as much as a dental surgery. And you are going to be working in that room. In Dev's land, probably 2 hours a day, rest of us 8 hours a day. So it's really, really important, the ergonomics, the whole working of that room, which includes dental equipment, includes the patient access, includes the cabinetry, and how that all works together. So that's my first bit of advice, to research that. Don't necessarily follow the trends. Dev just mentioned Belmont and ADEC, and that's fine, but that's fairly unique to the UK. There's lots of dental equipment around the world, and there's something that's right for you. So ergonomics, big thing. Spend time, go through what you've learned in your life so far. You can easily get musculoskeletal issues in dentistry. I've seen that. I walked into a surgery. I've done this for about 25 years, by the way. And you can go into surgery and the dentist says, "Oh, my back's really, really bad, and I just wish I could sort of enjoy dentistry like I used to." You say, "Well, sit down. Let me see you working. Sit down. Right. I need a nurse. I need a patient in the chair." And you see them working, and you see them twisting and turning, and you're like, "Oh dear, this is really, really bad. You poor thing. We need to put a bomb on this, and we need to change the whole thing." And you redesign the room and you set it out. So if you're doing a squat practice, you can do that from the beginning. You can design the layout of the building. If you get a good professional design team, they will design the practice correctly, and then get the rooms correct, get the door access correct. You want daylight into the room, and you can create a surgery that's going to work. It's really easy to design a dental practice, really easy to design a surgery, really easy to bung some equipment in, but it's very, very difficult to actually do it well and create a surgery, create a practice that you're proud of, your staff are proud of, even your clients, they'll be proud of. They want to be associated with it. It's a happy environment. That actually all goes right back down to the dental equipment, because that is the thing you're sitting on, working with. That's what a patient sitting on. You're working with 8, 9, 10 hours a day. So get the ergonomics right, and also the repairability, the support is very, very important. You can buy the best dental chair in the world, and if you haven't got support, which Deb mentioned a little bit back, it's got to be maintained, it's got to be looked after, it's got to be installed correctly, it's got to be looked after by your staff first of all, and that's a big thing. But you need local support. So if you've got kit at home, sort of washing machines and boilers and all that, you need to have some support on it. And if your equipment's not working, you can't earn any money. So it's so important on those things. So patient turns up, you set up this new lovely squat practice, you spend a fortune on it, and it's all rolling really nicely, and suddenly the chair stops working, the suction pump, the x-ray, something stops working, and you're like, oh, panic. And it's patients in the waiting room, and they've just come for the first time, and you walk out there and you say, "I'm really, really sorry, Mr. X. I can't see you today. The equipment's not working." "What do you mean? I'm in terrible pain. I've been recommended, and this is the best thing since sliced bread. I've come here." "Well, I'm sorry, I just can't do anything." So point to make is reputable brands, and make sure you got support, and ergonomically look after yourself. And if you want to add anything to that, Murray.
No, that's good, and it's worth thinking about patient impressions, isn't it? A chair which looks good, luxury upholstery, simple thing, doesn't cost much extra, but it has a big impact on what patients think about it. And as Dev mentioned, don't buy Chinese or cheap equipment, because you will buy twice. And as a personal thing, I don't know if everyone here will agree with me, but I really don't advocate buying second-hand equipment, because it's a false economy, in my opinion, and I can prove it.
Yeah, no, I think everything that both Phil and Murray mentioned is completely true, and it's very, very important to learn from mistakes of others, even myself, done in the past before. But I think the key thing from my side is that two things that I would do, and it's actually quite important, is the support is actually more important than the chair sometimes. As Phil mentioned, we bought I remember I bought my first ever chair from one of the big suppliers, one of their names. Thought, they're a great big supplier, it should be fine. You buy it and then, no issues with the chair, how many things go wrong. Had about probably 7 call outs after they got installed. Still wasn't right after 7 call outs, and they kept charging me for each call out as well afterwards, even though they messed up in the first place. And you just think, that level of basic kind of, you buy a chair, you get it installed, should be straightforward. Like, you get filling done. But actually, it's a huge difference in terms of equipment support, and that comes from a lack of, I think, manpower in the UK. I'm pretty sure Phil can tell you the same thing too. But I think in recent years, there's been literally like no actual, new recruits coming in the market who wants to become a dental engineer, which is, I don't know if that's a surprise or not. But the point is that, it's one of those things where if there's not enough support behind the actual company selling the chair, and they can't come out to you within a 24-hour period and fix it and get it done the right time the first time. Same as with dentistry, right? You can get a dentistry really bad and the filling falls out every single 2 months, or you do it right the first time around, lasts for 20 years. And actually, that's why I'm saying about investing in the right company when you buy your equipment, because they all have almost the same prices. It's not much in it. They're all literally the same price, so maybe £500 here and there. So actually choosing the right company or the right team in your local area, and you ask these questions before you buy the equipment, saying, how many people do you have support? What's the kind of, your service level agreement of coming out to fix the chair if I have problems? What's the level of experience you've got in this, with these different engineers in my area? That's all really important stuff to find out, because actually you don't have that, and you have someone, just come into the area for the first time, they're like traveling 3 hours away. They're never going to be able to support you, enough for, the way you want a practice to run in terms of, a really slick operation. And secondly, I would say, look, you can get really expensive chairs, really basic chairs. I compare them to a car sometimes. You can get amazing cars that you get to A to B, and then you get, basic cars that get A to B. They're the same job, but it depends on your luxury feel of the practice. If you want to go for the high-end feel, go for high-end chairs. But at the same time, back to my first point, if it's a squat for the first time, try to go really minimal. That just does the basic function of what you need for a chair. That gives you what you need clinically. If you need a motor, or if you need everything else, get it as well. But try to go for stuff that you can financially afford, because you haven't got guaranteed income from day one. And therefore, you got to make sure you're really conservative in what you're doing and not spending a fortune on a fit out, but spending the right amount. And I'm sure Murray and Phil can advise on that as well, if you speak to them. But yeah, I think it's just really important about support, because we've had the same issues so many times in the past where we've used the wrong company for the wrong support, and we've been burnt after. One day of clinical time lost is like £2,000, £3,000 to us. And I'm sure you have 3 days off, you basically paid for a chair. So yeah, really important to think about support and being with the right people.
Just to jump in there, Dev, it's excellent. I remember very early on in my career, a dentist said to me, how do I know you give good support? And that's a question I'd just leave out there for everybody. You're talking to salespeople and you say, do you support your product? Do you look after it? And yeah. And they will promise the world. But this guy actually said to me, he said, I need 15 references of dentists in my area you can prove you look after. And I was like, wow. But we did it, we had it, and that's part of it.
Wow, that's pretty good, Phil. I'm not surprised, to be fair. I'm not surprised, but yeah, it's really important, and I would actually recommend that to anyone else. Anyone looking to any supplier for equipment, please get references for a few people at least that they can that you can speak to locally who've used them before. Good. Next one, Priya. Oh, Priya dropped off.
I think that's me now. Can I get funding?
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So answer to this question is yes, if you're a dentist, you should be able to get funding. I think the key factors here are to consider is when you're looking at a freehold practice, you should be able to get 100% loan to value rate from your own bank in that type of funding, and you would want to stretch that funding to over as long a period as possible. So a 25-year, a 20-year option to give you to allow you to keep your cash flow minimal. If you're looking at a lease practice, then you're probably going to be getting a sort of 75% loan to value ratio. And allow the bank to fund the purchase of the practice, and allow somebody like ourselves who understand dentistry, who understand the tax elements of it, and how to put together the funding to do your equipment, because then you're separating your equipment finance with your bank, so they're not then coming to you every week and saying, I want a projection on how your practice is doing, because they're digging and drilling into everything because they've probably got a debenture over the practice. So what I would say about when you're looking at funding is to do it over as long as per term as possible. At the moment, you can get funding over 7 years. That's going to allow you to be able to keep your cash flow low to get the practice up and running. You can always settle those agreements early if you want to. Our funders don't charge you any penalties to settle those agreements early. So you could take it over 7, but plan to pay it back over 5. And then you're kind of back to the same thing, especially with interest rates increasing as they have been and inflation going up. Being able to fund your practice and manage those costs is key. There are some things that we'll talk about in the next questions of what you would need for an application, but I'll come on to that on one of the other questions. Don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that. Okay.
Should we move to the
Next question?
Yes, the next question is, how much would I need to budget for?
So when it comes to budgeting for your squat practice, again, Murray and Phil have already touched on this. Every practice is very different, but I think the key here is, as Dev said, is not to go too massive too quickly. I think if you're looking at buying a practice where you've got capacity for, say, 5 to 7 surgeries, that's a good thing to do for growth, but you might want to find that you want to start off with maybe 4 or 5 surgeries and make sure that the plumbing is in place for those other surgeries, so that when you do need to expand, you can drop in a chair quite quickly rather than having to go through that process of downtime, plumbing, all of that time. That takes a lot of time to do that. So I think sometimes it's, you know, budgeting for what you can afford at that time, and that's going to come down to your business plan and cash flow, which I'll come on to in a moment. But it's choosing the right equipment for your practice, for your patients specifically. I see this time and time again where practice will set up with, as Dev and Murray have already mentioned, maybe pre-owned equipment. It's not lasted very long. And the difference sometimes between a £15,000 chair and a £17,000 chair is about £30 a month. So you want to get the chair that's right for your practice and your patients. If you have nervous patients, you want to make sure that you've got a chair that allows you to cater for that, etc. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything else to that question.
I'll just jump in on that. That's excellent. The differential is the thing to consider. You're not going to get a chair for £1.
Correct.
It's going to be between 12, 15 or 15 and 20. And my advice to anyone is, if it's take the differential and then take the whole life cycle of that equipment.
Yeah.
So just say it's £5,000 difference and you're going to own that chair for 10 years. That's £500 a year.
Yeah, and
it drops down very, very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and from a finance perspective, again, £5,000 is kind of £100 a month difference to get that chair that's right for you. I think, you know, if you were looking at a practice where you're fitting it out with £100,000, for example, over 5 years, you're going to be looking under £2,000 a month. And over 7 years, you're going to be looking at around £1,500 a month. So if you can spread that term, because you've got a lot to consider when you're setting up your practice, if you consider spreading it over fixed term for 7 years, you know, by the time you take your tax relief off of that, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail as well, you're kind of mute to the fact that the cost of the outlay equipment in the first instance. You're back to what the cost of the kit started out at, having the kit what's right for you, that's going to last for a long period of time. I mean, the average dental chair is 10 to 15 years. It's key to get it right in the first instance.
Okay, can move on to the next question, which is, what information will you need for the application?
So when it comes to the application for funding, what's important here is to make sure that you've got, I know we've touched on briefly, but part of this is a decent business plan. And the things that are key on a business plan is what's the information about you, first of all. So you and your CV, and what's your experience, what have you done, what other practices have you worked in, and you're kind of telling a bit about you first. And then the practice location is key, getting the right location, and putting that on your business plan. What's the practice going to look like? And that's where the drawings come in, because they're key to kind of show the outline of the practice. How was that practice being funded? So the purchase part of that practice, that's key to put in your business plan. And did you put in any deposits from yourself? Was it business loan or mortgage for that longer purchase? Competitive analysis, as we mentioned briefly already today, this evening, is to know what's going on in the town that your practice is in. What other dental practices are in your town, and what are they offering, and what's your unique USPs? It's the SWOT analysis. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. It's really strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And especially in a time that we've been going through over the last 18 months, it's important to be able to keep your cash flow intact to allow you to trade through those threats if there are any more downtimes or closures. God forbid there isn't. But as Dev has already said, I think the dentistry has been booming, certainly on the cosmetics dentistry, and with Zoom calls and meetings, that's allowed people to really want to go in and spend that money on cosmetic dentistry and so on. And so it's key to look at what's your USPs in the area and put that in your business plan. Cash flow and projections, it's important that you have that done professionally. If you can have somebody that knows what they're talking about, we can help and provide cash flow information, which will tell you how to budget for your NHS contract, private contract, staffing costs, all the things that you would expect to see in running a practice. And also make sure that when you're looking at it from a business plan perspective, that I see a lot of business plans that are very optimistic, and it's great if that's going to be what ends up happening, but I think you need to write your business plan from maybe a pessimistic perspective and make sure that you are budgeting it on that basis, because then if practice goes from strength to strength, which most of them do, then your cash flows are going to be pretty spot on. And then the main purpose of the business plan is not only for the funders for getting you funding, but also for you to be able to revisit that business plan and make sure in 6 months' time, are you on track? Are you doing what you said you were going to do in your business plan? And do you need to revisit anything if one element of the practice isn't working quite as well as you thought it might? So that's really, really key.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, that's my Siri talking, if anyone can hear that.
Great. Yep.
I don't know if anyone wants to add to any of that, or so sorry.
No, go ahead, Samantha.
Okay, so what are the rates? Well, this is an interesting question and one I get asked all the time. Rates have been pretty low for the last 10 to 13 years, and they do vary. At the moment, I would say from 3.5% going up to about 5% on equipment, and for practice loans, I would say probably they're from 4 to 6%, that kind of rate. But I think what's important is actually making sure that we look at your overall project, what funding you're going to need, and how we can split that funding between our multiple funders. We work with about 12 different medical funders, and sometimes it's important to actually look at what your needs are now, what your needs are in the next 6 months to a year, and make sure that we structure that funding to get everything that you need. And that's the beauty us being a broker, because it allows us to split your funding around between multiple funders if we need to. So we might get a bit with one funder for your equipment, and we might get a bit with another funder for your building works and the non-tangible items that you would need. And we can also look at maybe structuring. Most of our funders will look at a 25% split of non-tangible items along with the equipment funding, which can reduce the cost elements as well. And people like Angan, who do the whole project for you, can also then look at structuring that so that we can achieve what we need to for the funders. Hope that answers that question, unless Dev wants to ask.
Yeah, one question is, what's your thoughts on the recession in terms of the rates increasing over the next year or two?
We've certainly seen rates increasing pretty much since March. And I would say the key element here is if you are thinking about setting up a squat, is time frame is key, because you need to make sure that you lock the rates in while they're still low. I think they will go up again by the end of this year. I think if you can get it locked in, and maybe we can do stage payments, so you can start the agreement, so that gives you that rate fixed at that point, because once the agreement has gone live, that rate is then secured. And if we release a stage payment to your suppliers, it means that you're not paying everything, so it gives you that protection. It's also securing the equipment with the suppliers, because we're seeing big difference in time frames of getting equipment. I mean, I think a Belmont chair is now predicted, guys will tell me this more, May time. So it's key to get your orders in if you are looking at opening a practice pretty soon, because not only the costs of interest rates are going up, but also the cost of equipment has been going up as well. So if you can secure it now, and it all comes back down to the budget of your practice, then you're going to be able to be on track for your budget, rather than getting unhidden costs that you weren't expecting. I think CBCT scanners have gone up $5,000 in the last 3 to 4 months. So it's really key to lock those in. And that's why I would suggest locking in the rate for a longer term, because the difference by the time you take your tax relief off, I mean, I'll give you an example, £100,000 project, 5 years, under £2,000 a month, you're going to pay back just shy of 120,000 over 5 years. After your tax relief, it's going to come to about 72,000, because you're going to relieve that off if you're a sole trader. If you're a limited company, it's going to cost you about 91, because you're going to get a different tax relief rate on that. And 7 years, £1,500 a month, you'll pay back 126 if you go to the full 7 years. But after your tax relief, you're back down to 76 as a sole trader, and as a limited company, you'll pay back 96 over 7 years. So there's not a massive difference between keeping the funding for a further 2 years, but what it does allow you to do is fix those costs and keep cash flow, because there's nothing worse than opening up a new practice, being all excited, and then finding that it's drudgery, because you're going in every day and you've got this bill going out, that bill going out, and it's unmanageable and unenjoyable. Where if you can keep your costs and your cash flow low, it allows you to enjoy what you're doing, and the kit pays for itself over the period of time. You don't pay your reception staff up front, so why pay for your equipment up front? Let it pay for itself.
Another question I had, Samantha, is on covenants. What kind of covenants do you guys normally have on squats? Because obviously it's not like a typical practice where, I don't know if it's the same kind of
So funders will lend to squat practices. I think what's key is, and certainly when it comes to your business plan as well, even if you're not planning to do this, from a business plan's perspective, you're going to be working somewhere else to be able to support your income. So if day one you open up and you've got no patients coming in, and there's a period of time that you've got downtime, if you can say in your business plan, and if you try to do this and plan to do it, even if you don't end up doing it, with a lot of dentists don't, because they find that their squats take off quite quickly. But if you put in your business plan that you're going to be earning an income as an associate somewhere else, that's going to help support the application. I think it's also key that if you have got some cash and you are planning to put that cash into the finance, you're better to keep that cash, because it's much easier for us to be able to get the approvals in place when I can show a nice healthy bank statement. Showing that there's cash there for contingency plans. You really need to kind of base the practice on the fact that you might not have patients in the first 3 months. so that you can then trade through that. Now, that's very rare that happens. In my experience, most squat practices, we've certainly seen over the last 18 months, because elective treatments are going through the roof, have done really, really well. And I don't see that changing, because NHS is quite difficult at the moment. So I think the alternative dentistry, where patients are now going into private practices and they're liking the treatments that they're receiving, and they're happy to stay with a private practice, maybe over an NHS practice, for example. So I think if that answers the question.
Yeah, when I meant covenants, I was just saying, like, after a year, say a recession hits and things go downwards, do you start looking at practice accounts and checking the monthly repayments versus profitability, or do you not really get involved with that?
From this is where you've got the difference of the banking funding and our type of funding. So our type of funding is with lenders who understand medical, and they lend really against the asset. They're looking at the asset, really, where when you're looking at getting practice purchase funding, they're really looking at how well is that practice doing. They've probably got a debenture over the practice. They've probably got security over the over property. It's a different type of funding, and that's why I'm saying you should really use your banking funding for practice purchases, buy-to-let properties, and keep this type of funding separate, because then your Barclays are not seeing what you're spending. They're not seeing the £200,000 that you're spending on equipment, and you don't really want them to know that. You want to separate it. Our funders, they just want to make sure that the repayment and serviceability is there. If a practice was to get in trouble, we've had some issues over COVID. We would then speak to those funders and come up with a plan that is suitable to maybe extend the term, or look at all those things that were happening over COVID, like payment breaks and so on. But it's a different type of funding. The funding is secured really against the asset. It can be arranged very quickly, normally within, I would say, a £200,000 project, splitting it maybe with a couple of funders, would probably take around 4 days to get secured, where your banking funding, you could be talking 12 weeks. And you've got solicitors and lawyers and all of that. You're shaking your head there, Dev. You kind of understand that sort of thing.
Sometimes, depending on which bank you use. So yeah,
exactly. So it can take a lot longer to get secured. And again, it depends on what's behind you.
No, it's a really good point, and I think that's really important for the audience to understand that there's a big difference between the kind of asset finance versus acquisition finance, and I think that's really cleared up for. So thanks for that.
I think one of the questions I get asked quite a lot, and it's quite interesting. If I went into a room of dentists and I asked, is it better to have 2.5% rate over 20 years or 10 years, or than 4% or 3.5% over 5 or 7 years? Everybody will say to me, the longer term. But nobody will sit there and actually add up the 20-year cost at 2.5%. The fact that it's variable, it can change against a 5-year term at 3.5, 4.
Yeah, I think that comes down to mindset of cash flow, right? I think
it does.
Looking to put things on finance for as long as possible and see how it goes. But I learned this the hard way, actually. When you do repayments of a bank loan early, and it's over a 25-year loan or a 20-year loan, and you're buying a practice for £1 million, that 2-3% difference can actually be a huge difference in terms of the actual net effect versus just doing it in a 10-year period. But then again, it comes down to how confident you're on the business plan and the cash flow, etc.
Absolutely.
So it comes back to the first point we mentioned, is keep your cash flow tight, make sure you keep an eye on outgoings, and keep kind of a lean model for the first few months so you can get through it, and then once it's doing well, you can spend money and do more things later. But yeah.
And sometimes with a squat as well, sometimes the banks won't always lend to a squat for this sorts of projects when they're because there's no accounts, there's no business there. So sometimes using somebody like us, whether you use Snowbird or you use somebody in industry, I would say stay in industry, somebody who understands dentistry. It's important. Sometimes, we will do what we need to do to get that practice open. And that may be splitting it between multiple funders. But then once it's open and there's a tangible asset practice running and operating is there, that's when you can go back to your own bank and maybe restretch that over a longer period of time, because the practice is then open and the banks then can see that there is a operating, running practice. So sometimes that's key, just to get the practice open and up and running.
Yeah, No, agreed. Great. What's the next question, Priya?
Okay, so the next question is, how does the CQC application process work?
Hi everyone, good evening. That's me, Saba from Smart Compliance. So obviously setting up the squat, it can be really, really stressful. On the other side, it can be rewarding, but compliance is one of the topic a lot of dentists get stressed out about. So in terms of the CQC application process, at the moment, CQC have got a massive backlog due to the COVID-19. So it is taking up to 14 weeks. So I always recommend my clients, as soon as you get the keys in your hand, let's start the application form, because there's nothing wrong with starting the application process as early as possible, because you would have to apply for the enhanced DBS, which usually takes between 7 to 14 days as well, depending on if you've already got a previous one. Once that comes back, we would need to submit 2 application forms. And once you do submit these application forms, 90% of the time CQC do get back and they do require more evidence which is related to your application forms. So you need to collect that information, send that back to them, and then the process starts from there. So it is a bit of a lengthy process. So the more quicker you do it, the more better it is. Yeah.
Okay. And the next question is, how do I prepare myself for a registered manager interview?
So again, one of the things would be, once you have submitted your application forms and your site is ready, you would get a call from CQC who will arrange for a registered manager interview. And this is a question that's often asked to us. A lot of the dentists, they get nervous and say, oh my God, what's going to be asked in the question? Or what's going to be asked in the interview. I literally just done 2 today, 1 in the morning and 1 this afternoon. And the dentist was super, super nervous. The interview process is about 2 hours long. At the moment, CQC are not coming out to the sites. They are doing it over Zoom. It might change later on, but at the moment, that's what they are doing. So the interview process is 2 hours. During the first hour, it is actually a fit to practice person interview, where they would ask you questions about yourself, your employment history, what services you have applied for, whether you have knowledge and understanding of all the CQC regulations and legislations. They talk about things like Mental Capacity Act, safeguarding. They will also look at your policies during the application process, and they will question you about your policies as well. So that's the first part to the whole application form. So it's really, really important that you're fully prepared, because some of the things are not really generic, and you do need to look into it, like what are the statutory notifications, or they will ask you about the Health and Social Care Act. So you might not know that in like a deeper understanding. So it's always best to prepare yourself for it. The second part is all about the provider and the site. So what they do is they will say, can you show us the site? So they will make you do like a patient journey. So if a patient is coming through the door, they'll say, can you show us how it all would work? They look at your floorings, if it's all compliant. They look at your cabinets, your surgeries, your decontamination room, if you've got like fire extinguishers, your emergency lighting. So it's a very intensive checklist that they go through. So again, it's very, very beneficial that you prepare your site. A lot of the times, dentists, they want to open their site as soon as possible, but they've still got like decorators, they've still got builders in there. So you have to make sure all the builders have gone. If there's any boxes, I was at one of them registered manager interview a couple of weeks ago, and the site was absolutely amazing. However, there was a skip right outside the site, and because there was a shortage of skip, the skip people weren't coming to pick it up. And they said, look, you would need to take pictures again and send it to us when the skip has gone. So it's really important that you ensure the site is 100% fully ready for the actual interview. Thank you.
Okay. So then the next question is, how do I prepare my site to be CQC ready?
So as I just mentioned in my previous question, that there are a lot of things that CQC would look for in your site. The best thing to do is work off a checklist. So a lot of the time I get questions asked from dentists about, what do I need to order? Have I got this in place? What do you think I need to put in my decon room? So we do like a surgery or squat practice startup checklist, and it clearly tells you what you need to make sure that it's in your surgeries, what needs to be implemented into the decontamination room, what are the equipment, instruments that you need to have in your reception area and your waiting area. So it's really, really handy that you work off a checklist and tick it off as you go along. So that's number one. Having site signages is very important. They do look for signages such as your hand washing signage on top of the hand washing sink. They will look at your medical emergency signages. So wherever you've got the medical emergency equipment, you've got oxygen cylinders, they will look at all the signages that you have got in place. And last but not least, as I mentioned, the building work. Make sure the site is clean, it's clear, it's not dusty, and it's, you know, fully prepared for the inspection, because once they would sign you off, you can legally see patients literally from that minute when you get a certificate saying that you've been signed off and the site is open. So that's why you need to make sure the site is 100% ready at the time of the interview.
But could I just ask, is it best if the registered contact is the principal dentist or practice manager?
With the registered manager, I would highly recommend is the principal dentist. The reason why is when you are opening a squat, you might get a practice manager, but at the moment the staff turnover is so high. What tends to happen is that manager might not stay. And if you're in the middle of the application process, because once you submit your application and you've put the registered manager's details down, you've got 14 weeks for the CQC to get back to you. Within that 14 weeks, anything can happen. So what happened with one of my clients, she recruited a practice manager. The practice manager was a previous registered manager as well. So she had all experience. They submitted the application form. After 6 weeks, that practice manager got another job, a very good offer from a corporate company, and she resigned and she went there. So we spoke to the CQC and they said, unfortunately, you would have to resubmit your application and we will have to start right from the beginning, because she was the registered manager and the nominated lead. So it's highly recommended that the principal dentist, especially for squat practices, the first time the principal dentist or the dentist is the registered manager. And you can always change that once your site is signed off and you're ready and everything is all okay. You can change that to a practice manager later on.
Okay. Last but not least, the last question is, how can smart dental compliance help?
So with the smart dental compliance and training, we do work very different to all the other compliance system. We do specialize in squat practices. We open 3 to 4 squats in a month, and we work with different companies and suppliers. Apart from our compliance software, which a lot of practices are currently using, we also offer like an A to Z package. So a lot of people think, oh, it's only about having compliance for new practices, about having policies and procedures in place. It's not. There are other things that goes with it. And again, a lot of the dentists, they don't understand that. So one of the things is the site needs to have all their risk assessments done. So you would need to have fire, Legionella, disability, and health and safety risk assessments done, and submit that with your CQC application form at a later stage. The other thing is the RPA, which is the Radiation Protection Advisory Service. You do need to have a dedicated RPA for the site as well. Site visit is very important. So when you have finalized the site, I would definitely recommend getting the compliance consultant to come in, have a look at the site as well, because they can really advise you. A lot of the time when I go halfway during the build stage, they said, oh, this is the decon room. And then we say, well, the decon room is not sufficient enough for a 12 surgery practice. So you might need to extend the space. So it's always a good idea to get an opinion from a compliance consultant who comes in, has a look, and they can advise you. I know that sometimes the suppliers do it, which is absolutely amazing if they're doing that. But if they're not, it is recommended to get somebody in. We also do the CQC application registration submission, preparation for the registered manager interview. So it's a whole package from A to Z. So everything that is required for you to successfully pass your CQC inspection for the registered manager interview and to open a squat practice, we cover all of that. Whereas a lot of the other compliance company, they just provide you with policies and procedures. And that's it. That's how we help.
Okay, so that was all the questions that we had today. There may be some questions in the Q&A section. Lisa, have you got that list? Can't see any on my side.
I think they've all been answered. Well, we're going
okay.
through it, so.
Fab, great.
If anyone has got any further questions, then.
Oh, there's a one question in there, I think. There's a question at the bottom.
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, how big should the decontamination room be if there's 26 surgeries?
Oh,
It's quite big surgery.
Okay. So I'm not good with maths and I'm not good with my measurements usually, but I don't know if Murray can help with that in terms of the measurements. But if it's 28, so what we usually say is for up to about 3 surgeries, 2 to 3 surgeries, 1 autoclave is okay, depending on how busy the surgery is. So if it is 28 surgeries, you would be looking at a lot of autoclaves. So you would need space to store all those autoclaves, the ultrasonic bath. You've got, you know, your sinks as well. You've got the washing sink, you've got the rinsing sink, you've got the hand washing sink. A lot of storage goes into the decontamination room. So yeah, for 28 surgeries, you do need to have a reasonable size of decontamination room. And I can, again, in terms of the sizing, I can find out for you and send that via email.
Just suggest if you've got a practice that big, you need to look at your whole spatial flow of your practice. And you could easily be probably best to have multiple decon rooms,
Yeah.
which will help your spatial flow, staff flow, and not have everyone sort of crowding into one area.
And if you're about to buy 28 dental chairs, please give me a call.
As well, please, because I want to know. I'm not serious, mate. Is this practicing in the UK, guys, or is this somewhere else? Because it's a crazy practice.
yeah.
What's your biggest practice, Steph?
What is it? 14 to 18, I guess, isn't it? 18 chairs soon, hopefully.
That's big.
28 is bigger. Wow. Where are you based, Marilena? Can you can't speak English, I guess. Shame.
No, but she can write in the Q&A again. She's
Okay.
interested.
Very interesting. Maybe she might 2 to 8. I don't think it's 28. 28 is a star.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. I don't think there's any more questions. So, look, we've got email addresses. Oh, here we go. We planned
gone up.
32. Oh, it's got to 32 now. Where about are you based? Is it London or is it like somewhere up north? It's the most exciting thing I've heard all day.
There's another question in there. Is that the same person or?
I think it is,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is the same person. East
Oh, there's
London.
2 questions.
East
Oh,
London.
East London.
East
Wow.
London,
Give me a call. My email.
I think give everyone a call, all the
yeah.
panelists, give them all a call.
What's practice called out of interest? What's the name of it?
Dev's become a detective now.
Jesus. I generally thought that we had the biggest one in London, but this is way bigger.
Wow.
Definitely needs planning through the whole. It's not just decon. The whole spatial flow of a practice is very, very careful to be considered. It's many aspects of it. So the patient experience when they come in, they're not just herd of cattle or getting rushed around. They all individual, all got to be looked after. And then bathroom facilities, decon facilities, reception, in, out, and all the back staff. We call it back of house. It's all the things that happen that patients don't need to see. It's all got to happen on a large scale. And so the patient can come in and be cared, looked after, and go home and recommend you.
Yeah, no, it's that size practice. You really need to have an expert team. So probably best to get in touch with Murray and Phil soon. But no, great guys. Thank you all for your time today. And I don't think there's any more questions now. But if anyone has any more questions or queries or any comments or anything, please contact any of us. Email addresses on the screen. And yeah, thanks to all the panelists tonight. I know you spent your time on the evening to go through some of your amazing wisdom and advice. So I'm hoping that was very useful for the audience today. Otherwise, have a good evening, everyone. And yeah, hopefully might do another one soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.